Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today we're going to be on the Battle for Azeroth Alpha, taking a look at Frost EK legendaries. Now, one of the reasons I'm doing this is I've heard the devs say in the past that they want to make the legendary items we had in Legion at 120 obsolete, and I'm kind of curious about how they're going to go about doing that, because obviously at level 119 still, these legendaries are still very viable, and I feel like even if there's a major item level difference, legendaries are still going to be stronger than just a normal piece of item. Now, obviously, if it's probably the Azerite armor or something along those lines, you could definitely take it out and exchange them. So I'm really curious, are they just going to disengage at 120? We won't really be able to find out until I believe Friday when we're allowed to do raid testing, and they're going to scale us up to 120. So we'll see maybe what's going on at that point in time, but hopefully we'll get some answers and find out pretty soon. But anyways, let's go ahead and take a look at these legendaries and talk about what they're doing in PvE and PvP, and talk about some buffs slash nerfs going on with different ones. So let's do this. Now, here on Alpha, we can only equip one legendary at a time. Obviously, our characters, if we're playing live or progressing through, I have a feeling will be completely different since we have completed the Order All missions, and these pre-made characters are only able to obviously equip one. So the first one we're going to look at is Cold Heart. Now, Cold Heart, we all have kind of a love-hate relationship with Cold Heart. It used to be really good in World PvP. They nerfed it down by base percentage, and I believe that nerf actually still applies, but it still does an insane amount of damage in World PvP and also PvE. Now, if I was going to quest through the game right now and I only had to choose one legendary, I would definitely be rocking Cold Heart as one of my legendaries, as our talent Winter is Coming no longer provides a stun, and to counter a lot of classes' bursts within the game, I need some kind of a stun. I either need it to generate distance between me and the target, or I need it to counter burst the target to kill them before they kill me, obviously. So what we do with Cold Heart, to get the most effective Cold Heart you can. Now, the other thing I gotta talk about, guys, is Blood Fury. Blood Fury does not affect Cold Heart anymore. It used to because it scaled off of attack power, but all the main abilities for just about every class in the game either scale off of intellect, strength, or agility, which is kind of a alright change. It's not a gigantic change, but it's an alright change, which will make Oryx deal, the same amount of damage with Cold Heart as, let's say, a human, because the AP no longer affects him. AP will affect melee damages, melee attacks, things like that. But it used to have a much greater effect on base abilities. But let's go ahead and just kind of pop this off. And if we get a crit, we get a crit. If not, you'll still see how hard it hits. Alright, so we want to go up and just kind of set up on a target. Now, to set up on a target for a big hold heart, obviously the only things we need or Unholy Strength for the 15% extra strength, then we need 5 stacks of Razor Ice, and then we blow cooldowns using Pillar of Frost and Blood Fury. And at that point is when we hit Icy Chains. Now, I did not expect Breath to be macroed in there. Now, as you saw, it hit for 22,900 damage. If that crits, we're talking 45,000 plus damage. And in terms of raw damage, that's the hardest I've seen a class crit so far. And I can imagine there may be another class that might get up that high, but at the moment, that's the hardest I've personally seen a class crit. I haven't looked through a lot of the other classes' legendaries and compared them, but I have tested out the majority of classes at the moment. And that right there is a very effective crit. Obviously, it's followed up by a every 2 seconds you gain a stack, Shadow Frost 20 times. It gets a 4-second stun. Yes, a 4-second stun on call. All you got to do is proc up the full 20 stacks and then lay out, obviously, a Chains of Ice to get a large amount of damage. Now, the other thing is, of course, we want to use Pillar of Frost to get a lot more damage out of it to counter, someone's burst really on the opener. Now, let's say you don't have time to put in 5 stacks. You're standing there, a rogue opens up on you. Bam, bam, rogue stun you, you're opened up, you pop one ability, you turn around, and you hit him with Icy Chains. Still hit for about 19,000 damage. If that crits, it's still going to be roughly around 36,000 damage, which is still a very strong hit regardless. Now, you're probably thinking with the damage reduction that they have on live, it'll be roughly around 60%, which you are right. If you're hitting for about 46,000, that means on a player, I've seen it hit for 24,000. It can probably hit a little bit harder if we mess around with it a little bit more. It was on a Shadow Priest that it was. But overall, you can take somebody, even at level 119, and knock off about 70% of their health just with that stun. If you can knock off 70% of their health in that stun, chances are your next obliterates, your Remorseless Winter within the next 4 seconds are generally going to kill the target, giving us quite a buff to mechanical strength. And obviously, if I had to chain 2 legendaries together for some world PvP at the moment, kind of deciding how strong, of course, the absorb neck's going to be, but 25% of your maximum health to 35k really isn't going to be that much, especially with how high the burst is at the moment. The main thing is counter bursting and nuking somebody harder than they nuke you at the moment on alpha. This will change, of course, later on down the road. But if I had to have my choice between 2 legendaries right now for world PvP, I'd choose Turvan's Whiteout Bindings with the Cold Heart chest piece over here, because that'll increase the damage another 15%. So instead of being 24k, it would be 25k, 26k. No, actually, no. Let me do a little math. More like 26 to 27k. Coming out of that icy chains there, which would be extremely effective even at level 119. Now imagine if you come across anything between level 110 to 116, you don't even got to get a crit out of it. You just pop Pillar of Frost and hit chains of Ice, and it's a one-shot at the moment for anyone below about level 116. If they don't have good gear, obviously it's going to be even more effective. So let's go ahead and get to the next legendary item. Now, losing a stun definitely sucks on any class. It's not very good for PvP, and for PvE, I mean, obviously Mythic Pluses, it's not going to be very great losing your stun either. But what if I told you that losing our stun actually granted us a slight PvE buff? Now, you're probably a little confused about that, and that brings us to our second legendary, which is going to be Sephuz. Whenever a target gets a CC effect on him, such as a root, sheep, stun, Sephuz is going to proc interrupt also. You're going to get a ton of haste. We're talking a ton of haste, which is going to bring you up to your haste cap, which is going to allow you to rotate cooldowns and damage a lot faster than you normally would. So the thing I kind of noticed about Sephuz here is, of course, we're nowhere near haste cap. We're like 17%. Our rotation's going to be garbage if we try to go for a full-on rotation. So we're going to get a lot of our damage off of either single target rune abilities or really just overall damage. Because if we're not going to the Frost Scythe, at the moment, our best option is really Frozen Pulse and going for that old-fashioned machine gun build that we kind of used in normal EN. We'll have to test some things out once launch hits, because obviously we've got legendary bracers and belt that we can use on our Frost DKs. That'll give us a little bit more mechanical stability, but if that mechanical stability won't be enough to bring our DPS above rocking a Frozen Pulse hard damage build and relying mainly on Frozen Pulse to keep up the low end of the damage, that's what we're going to have to be rocking. But if you're doing dungeons and you want ridiculous damage, you're definitely going to be rocking the Tarvons, obviously, as your bracers, and rocking Sephuz as, your secondary legendary item. And the reason being is Winter is Coming is a 5-second root, or after 5 times, it's a 8-second root. Now, this 8-second root is considered a CC. Now, you guys see where I'm getting at. Every 30 seconds, you can use Sephuz, and that'll get you a ton of haste, increasing your DPS exponentially. So anytime you use Remorseless Winter, anytime, it's going to proc Sephuz. So let's say you're on a target right here. Okay, so we're going to pre-pop Pillar of Frost before we go in that target, because Pillar of Frost is on a global cooldown now, so the chances are you want to use it before you engage the target, so you're running at him, Pillar of Frost, 1 second. By the time you get to him, we got Remorseless Winter, and that's when you start spamming your Frost Scythes and then proccing up, of course, that ability, Obliteration, and then going into your Frost Scythes even harder, proccing any Howling Blast procs for even more damage on both your abilities, and just dealing a ton of overall DPS to the target. Now, the other thing that you got kind of coming up is your Remorseless Winter's already already back up. You can spam the crud out of that ability. But what you want to do is wait a little bit longer. The reason being is because you have 30 seconds on your Sephuz until you can proc it again. Remorseless Winter is only a 20-second cooldown. And the thing to remember is we're using Frost Scythe and not Gathering Storm, so not using it right away doesn't affect your DPS nearly as much as it would if you were running a single target build. Now the reason being we want to stagger this another 10 seconds is the legendary ring is on a 30-second cooldown timer. So if we wait 10 extra seconds from that 20-second, chances are the next time we use our Remorseless Winter, we're going to be granted that Sephuz proc again once it roots the target. As you can see right there, Sephuz pops back up. We've got 23% extra haste, and we've hit 44%, and our damage is really just going to go off the walls right here with our AoE cleave going through a dungeon. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Frost Scythe damage coming off here. Now, with cooldowns rolling, it can hit from anywhere between about 3, 4 to 5,000 damage, which on 4 targets 5,000 damage is about 20,000 damage hit. So if you could get those consecutively, we're talking about some insane damage coming off on these targets. And of course with that Sephuz proc at haste cap, you're looking at a full rotation. You're looking at some massive damage coming off consistently because you can spam those Frost Scythe a lot faster than you normally would without the proc. So even though we might be mad about that consistent little Remorseless Winter stun, we've definitely still got our legendary chest that we can use in world PvP situations. Obviously, legendary items are not going to work inside PvP queued instances and expeditions. I've already tested that out just to make sure that they don't. Otherwise, that would be really extreme to be rocking that chest piece in there, running around one-shotting people. But I wanted to let you guys know about Sephuz definitely being a kind of, I'd say the change in Remorseless Winter being a little bit underrated, since it does grant us a better CC to proc up Sephuz without, needing to land an interrupt or relying on the fact that Remorseless Winter needs to be combined with Pillar of Frost to grant you the Sephuz proc. So let's talk about some other legendaries. Now, obviously, the best legendary overall, I've talked about it slightly with both of the past two legendaries, is Tavorn's Whiteout Bindings, which increases frost damage by 15%, making those, 5k Frost Scythe crits roughly 5.5 to 5.6k, but that adds up quite a bit to being over 2,000 plus extra damage. Every Frost Scythe swing if everything's critting, obviously. Adding quite a bit of pressure. It's usually why it's the main build for just about any build when it comes to playing a Frost DK at the moment. But overall, I'd have to say most likely that's what we're going to go with. For Mythic Pluses is Sephuz and then the Bracers, and we'll probably switch them out for single target, kind of like we're doing right now. But as you can see with the damage increase, how are these going to become obsolete with the amount of damage we just saw between the first three legendaries? That's really one of my main questions that I need to find out, like I was talking about in the beginning of the video, because 15% frost damage is really going to be super hard to replace as far as majority of legendaries. So we'll go ahead and talk about a couple of others here. Checking out Kultira's newfound will, obviously with this legendary, is going to increase the majority of our single target DPS, generally the secondary for single target pressure, and we've kind of got a spec here built more around single target pressure than obviously the Frost Scythe Cleave, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the damage and rotation of this spec. We'll go ahead and prop up a couple cooldowns, throw out Remorseless Winter, and go ahead and start off with some Obliterates, hopefully getting a Howling Blast proc, but we didn't get one at all. It's kind of saddening. But we'll just go into a normal rotation, hitting for about 7k-ish Obliterates popping off right there, which is actually some really strong Obliterates coming off using that legendary item. So obviously that's going to be a solid increase to our single target damage. But overall, would it be better to use than those other ones for AoE? Obviously not. Would it be better to use for single target when combined with the Bracers? Still yet to be seen. Hard to say currently at the moment. Without recount, the reason being we don't know what DPS this is actually bringing in. And you're probably wondering why I'm using Runic Attune over Shattering Strikes at the moment, because the characters on Alpha do not have the Force set. Without the Force set, you can't really disregard Frost Strike nearly as much. Frost Strike is much more of a main part of your DPS um, than Obliterate, overpowering it on live at the moment. Now, obviously, we got to take a look at the Seal of Necrophantasia, being that it is the go-to breath legendary. All right, so it gives us an extra empower, giving us the ability to elongate our breath. Surprisingly, breath right now deals a lot of damage, hitting for about 6 to 7k. Every second once it comes off, which even in world PvP is an insane amount of damage. But procking and getting there to being able to use breath is a bit of a challenge with how high the burst is. Obviously, if things become a little bit more elongated, it can become better. But at the moment, I do enjoy using Breath of Sindragosa over Obliteration, obviously because it's going to deal a lot more damage, and when it comes to single target burst on bosses, it's going to give you a lot more damage in shorter fights than Obliteration will. Obviously, if there's a second target, Breath of Sindragosa is going to proc even higher. Now, we put on Seal of Necrophantasia so we can get our second empowered, so let's go ahead and get up some runic power, and then we'll go for an elongated breath, because generally, when you're DPSing through a mythic and you're spamming Frost Scythe, you're not using very many Frost Scythes, or Frost Strikes, um, overall. So what you want to do is just get up your runic power using your Frost Scythe spam right before the boss. Make sure you're maxed out and get ready to go in on it. Make sure you have a few runes to spam your Obliterate, because that's going to be a fairly large part of your damage. And then you're going to run in and proc up some of that Breath of Sindragosa goodness and use your double empowers. Now, a couple things we need to remember is Breath of Sindragosa is not on a global cooldown. Like Empowered Rune Weapon, Pillar of Frost, and Obliteration. One of the reasons I like Breath more than Obliteration is the fact that it is not on a global cooldown, and you can proc it at the same time as Pillar of Frost and go straight into your damage without really much downtime here. We're going to go ahead and get a little more RP before we do this, and not really get much downtime here, and that's going to be one of the reasons why you want to pre-proc a lot of your runic power, is because how hard it really is to get your runic power fast at the moment, and then once you breath, to keep up your runic power because how slow our haste is and things along those lines. So let's go ahead and breath on this target. We're coming in for a big breath. We're going to go ahead and pop Mortis Winter right after and then go straight into the Obliterates. Now, if you're using Frost Scythe spam during the boss fight, you'll be able to keep your breath up for quite a bit of time, but overall, is it going to be enormous? No, it's not going to be enormous. Just for the reason being is you're going to have to insert Obliterates here and there just to keep your breath going, just to have enough runic power to keep breathing on the target. And as you can see there, we kept breath up for quite a bit, made it through both of our rotations of damage, and breath's going to fall off right then. Still quite a bit of damage. I'm not exactly sure how long that breath up was for. I probably should have timed it. But overall, it's going to grant a lot more single target burst than if you were rocking Obliteration. And as far as DPS being more fluent, breath's going to be more fluent than Obliteration, just because Obliteration is going to add another 1 second to your global cooldowns. And it's also going to make Pillar of Frost give you 1 less second of effective damage coming off of the strength increase for your overall rotation. So as you can see, I'm very curious to see what's higher than the other damage. And also, one of the things that I know from early on in Legion when we had low secondary stats is breath was actually hitting harder than consistency specs in much shorter fights. So that's one of the reasons I'm bringing it up currently, because if we let's say breath stays as powerful as it is, and we're dealing with, I don't know, maybe tyrannical and mythic plus, things along those lines, where it's not a 5-minute fight, but a 2-minute fight or a minute and a half fight, something along those lines. I can definitely see at the moment with the way things are scaled that breath is going to come out on top when it comes to kind of like that short overall burst, that 100-yard sprint instead of that 3-mile sprint. Overall, so I mean, breath's solid. Breath's pretty solid. I don't know if I would use Seal of Necrophantasia over like the bracers and the belt for the breath spec in Battle for Azeroth, but we'll have to test that out a little bit later on, obviously, because none of this is really set in stone. All of this could change tomorrow. We have no idea. But it definitely works out pretty good with breath. It does a lot of damage. As far as PvP goes, breath, it is so hard to actually get there at the moment. It's so hard to actually get it off on somebody because of how high the burst and how high a lot of the damage of the classes are able to do at the current moment. Let me see, what other legendaries do we got in here? We have the legendary helmet we can go ahead and toss on for an extra 20% Howling Blast damage, which is not amazing, but it's still pretty good. It's kind of like it's good, but it's not bad. And if I was gonna rock this legendary helmet, obviously I would want to maximize Freezing Fog damage, in which case I wouldn't use Gathering Storms. I'd have to go Frozen Pulse, either that or Frost Scythe to keep up our secondary damage, and then deciding from there what I'd want to proc. Either Breath if I wanted to burst on bosses, and boss fights need a little bit more help. Obliteration for that little bit of extra AoE proc throughout the dungeon. It's kind of hard to say, but we're also using Frost Pulse. So I don't know. I'd probably still rock Breath if I was using Frost Pulse just for like the machine gun build we got going on. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up on this target, Remorseless Winter, and then we're going to go ahead and drop some big Obliterates and aim for that Howling Blast proc, because that's going to be where the majority of your damage is going to be coming from with this helmet. You can see there, Howling Blast goes off, doesn't crit very much, doesn't do that much damage. It hit the main target for 5.3k. I'm hoping one of these times that's going to crit, because that might actually be like a, a 10k Howling Blast proc right there, which would be fairly strong in just about any situation. And it doesn't seem we were able to get that off in that fight. Now, you can definitely see one of the major problems with running the legendary helmet and aiming for like a big Howling Blast build is definitely the consistency. And the consistency is what drove a lot of people away from it, while a lot more people went for the Frost Scythe build later on in Legion. Now, like even procs seem to be scarce at the moment. The procs are not proccing as much as they usually would. Alright, we've got our cooldowns up again. Let's see if we can go ahead and get another big Howling Blast off right there. It looks like we got about a 5k Howling Blast. We didn't have our strength percentage proc increase, so that's not going to be hitting for maximum at the moment at 4.2. Let's see if we can get one more. We did not getting off. So as at the moment, you can see it's not consistent. It hits fairly hard. It hits for about as much as Frost Strike crits, really, unless it crits on the main target, and then it'll hit for about 10k off targets. It'll probably hit for the same as Frost Scythe. So I gotta say, overall, this legendary Frost Helm, in comparison to using like Sephuz and the Bracers, is not nearly gonna be as strong as a Frost Scythe AoE build. And of course, we got Soul of Deathlord that we can go ahead and check out. With Soul of Deathlord, it's going to give you Frost Scythe, which allows you to take Gathering Storms, or Frost or Frozen Pulse, which is going to be kind of interesting to see. Really, obviously, I don't think it's nearly going to be as good as Sephuz, and I really don't think it's nearly going to be as good as the Bracers when it comes to the AoE pressure. But if I wanted to mess around with it a little bit, I do like the fact that we can take Frozen Scythe and Frozen Pulse, since Frozen Pulse hits for about 500 damage proc, roughly every second you don't have any runics up. So if you're standing there in front of a target spamming your Frost Scythes, while not allowing any of your runes to proc up because you're not using any frost strikes, could be quite a bit of AoE pressure. So I'm willing to test that out a little bit here and see what's happening with this ability. I'm not sure if I want to. Yeah, we'll go ahead and start off with one Obliterate. That granted us a nice little Howling Blast proc, and we're just going to go ahead and start just spamming the crud out of our Frost Scythe. Now, as you can see there, it looks like we are getting quite a bit of damage off of our Frozen Pulse there. It looks like it's hitting for about 300 at the moment, 350 too. It was closer to 500 with cooldowns rolling. But overall, like as you can see, it's not a huge amount of damage. It is 1,000 damage every time it procs every second, and that's going to be what raises up your minimal DPS if you're trying to go for that elongated damage. But yeah, as far as like crazy burst damage and gnarly AoE Frost Scythe damage, you really want to go with that Sephuz and that Bracer build. But that about sums it up for the legendaries. The rest of them are just Absorb Shield Pride as, which we'll check out later on when PvP gets tuned correctly. We got the belt right here, which just increases your healing capabilities. And of course, we got the movement speed boots, which increases your movement speed based on your highest stat. Now, the other thing that I'm kind of caught off guard for is the Consort's Cold Core, which reduces sindragosa's Fury cooldown by 50%, freezes all enemies that are hit by it. Now, the reason I'm kind of just looking at this is, why does this still exist? I mean, if sindragosa's Fury doesn't exist, why do these pants exist? Is it somewhere? Is it in one of the Azerite armors that we can't see? Is it in the shoulder? Is it in the chest piece that we're going to get later on? or not chest piece, shoulders, or the headpiece later on. I'm not 100% sure. Is it on PvP talents? Again, I'm not 100% sure because I know in World PvP we're going to be given PvP templates while we're inside those PvP instances, and whether or not we are able to use that and freeze our targets may actually come into effect later on, but I have no idea if it exists or not. It really hasn't been said if it's been completely taken out of the game or not. We've really kind of been kept in the dark for the most part about that. But the last thing we're going to check when it comes to legendary items on the Frost DK is going to be this little thing. This little gem right here, Kill Jane's Burning Witch, which basically any class can use. And to any character below, I'd say 113, this trinket's a one-shot. Incomparable to the amount of health I have right now, it'll probably do about 55 to 65% of your health. It's almost as strong as the chest piece, almost as strong as the chest piece Cold Heart, but not nearly as strong. Reason being is because on a mob target such as this DPS dummy right here, you'll see how much it hits for. Just on the DPS dummy, and it seems fairly impressive coming off right away. It's going to hit for about 35, 34k. Now on a normal target such as this Shadow Priest right here, it would hit that Shadow Priest for about 20k inside PvP instances, obviously causing Cold Heart to hit a little bit harder, and Cold Heart also applying a stun beneficially is going to be a lot better than that trinket. I hope you guys enjoyed this little update video on legendaries in Battle for Azeroth. I mean, overall, we've seen a couple things that caught us off guard, a few changes that'll help us in DPS, but overall, we'll have to wait a little bit to see exactly what's going on with them. And of course, I'll update you guys as soon as I find out myself, do a little bit more research, maybe test out a few raid bosses coming up within the week. I believe they announced it over there on Wowhead. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, comment if you have any questions, and of course, subscribe if you want to see more Battle for Azeroth future content. And until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.